I will pass it over to Meredith.
Thank you so much, Emma. We're so excited to be back with y'all today to talk about media bias and influence and how that's not normal. As always, Hannah and I will be giving the clinical and dietary perspectives, and then we have a fantastic lived experience speaker to join us later. So we'll kick things off with a note on language. For today's presentation and all presentations, we will be using the word fat as a neutral descriptor, not in a derogatory way, similar to the way that we use tall, short, old, young. This is a word that's been reclaimed by the fat community. I know it can be triggering for some, and so just know that you don't have to reclaim that word for yourself if it doesn't feel comfortable for you, but we will be using it today in that neutral way. We'll also interchange that with person of size, person in a larger body. You'll hear us kind of vary our language as we go. We will not be using the word fat as a derogatory comment, and we will not be using the O word, obese or obesity, because that word is rooted in the medicalization and pathologization of fat bodies. And in general, we don't like to use it. So typically we stay away from it unless we're referencing research that is specifically using that word, and we always give a content warning. I do also want to give a content warning today for the content of my slides. We will be showing examples of some very unfortunate TV shows, magazine covers, things like that, to talk about the impacts of media and how these things kind of work their way into the framework of our society. So this is my request to you to please take care of yourself in whatever ways you need today. If you need to turn your camera off, if you need to step away for a minute, please take care of yourselves. I know no matter how long we do this work, it still can bring up really tough feelings to come face to face with what we see on a daily basis. So with that, here is our lovely cycle of socialization. This has kind of been our connecting theme for this whole series. Today, we're continuing our conversation in this green section over here, institutional and cultural socialization, which is really the space that enforces the things we're taught during first socialization and is what codifies them into our brains and into our nervous systems. Media influence. How does it happen? Why is it important? Ultimately, we as a society of humans critically rely on cultural norms to guide our thought and behavior. Cultural norms convey information about what is good, right, proper, valued, beautiful. They basically tell us what we should do, what we should say, what we should think, how we should be, and give us kind of a rule of law for existing in society. What we know is that exposure to stigmatizing content, if we're watching shows that stigmatize fat bodies, that stigmatize other marginalized groups, this negatively influences our attitudes. And so specifically for folks viewing media that stigmatizes larger bodies, that it begets more negative attitudes towards people in larger bodies. So overall, stigma begets more stigma. The more media we consume that tells us that fat bodies are bad, the more we start to hear that narrative in our brains. Even if we are members of the fat community, I know many of us have probably experienced that internalized fat phobia, where that messaging from society and especially from media is so strong that it becomes a voice in our head, kind of policing our own thoughts and behaviors in the way that we live our lives. Ultimately, our Unlearning series is centered on identifying the etiology of cultural norms and methods of evaluation. So, like, how do we come face to face with this content that we know exists in the world? How do we evaluate it fairly? How do we determine what we allow in, what we allow to create our personal norms? And how do we acknowledge the impacts of social programming and learning how to unpack all of that? Media is such a huge part of how these cultural norms are created and taught and maintained. So when you think about the television shows that you watched as a kid, the movies that you watched as a teenager or a young adult, books that you've read, the magazine covers that are, lining the aisles as you check out at the grocery store, we really have to have an understanding of how just having that media around us impacts our beliefs and actions and the beliefs and actions of people around us. I am a millennial. I was born in 1991. And so we are going to talk a lot today about some of the very terrible, shows and magazine covers and just kind of narratives of especially the early 2000s, although this is pervasive across decades and time spans. That is something that is very visceral for me personally, is the memories of kind of what those cultural norms and narratives were about bodies when I was growing up, when I was a teenager. And so I think we probably all can relate to that feeling in some way. When we're thinking about media, specifically television, and we're thinking about kind of the juxtaposition of women in fat bodies being portrayed in media, specifically television and movies, what we know from the research is that type of television viewing among males increases their tendencies to stereotype fat women in real life. And it also predicted increased eating disorder symptomology among participants of both genders. So if we're watching media at all that is stigmatizing fat bodies, specifically fat women, we start to take that in and keep that in our brains, that being fat is bad, being a fat woman is bad, we're worth less. And then eating disorder symptomology goes up for both men and women when that message is taken home. These are some of the most prevalent examples of weight stigma and weight bias in media. This is some of what my content warning was about. So we have things like My 600-Pound Life, The Biggest Loser, Brendan Fraser's movie The Whale, Pitch Perfect with Fat Amy, Mean Girls with Regina George and her weight gain, Monica from Friends, who, they're flashing back to when she was fat Monica and now her having more value now that she's lost weight in present day. I'd love to open up the chat and just have kind of a quick conversation about how these shows, movies, or other media that you have seen has impacted either your internalized fat phobia, the way that you feel you've been treated by other people. I'd just love to hear from you about how these stereotypes, these character tropes, this bias has landed for you as you've experienced it going along. I think overall, when this messaging is what we're inundated with at every turn, it's really challenging for those of us in fat bodies to believe that we belong, to believe that we have value. And it reinforces the belief that all of these stereotypes that you see pictured are true and accurate, right? So things like people in larger bodies are lazy, we lack willpower, we lack self-control, we have huge appetites, we just need to diet and exercise, we are going to die without intervention, we're miserable and lonely, we can't be the romantic interest in any sort of movie show, we can't be smart, we can't be popular, we can't be included, we gain value when we lose weight, things like that. These messages become more deeply encoded in our cultural norms. So some of the things from the chat, I'm just going to shout these out. I used to want to be on The Biggest Loser because I wanted to lose weight when I was younger. The message that it's okay for men to be in larger bodies, but maybe not for women. I hear that. I used to want to be on The Biggest Loser so it would be socially acceptable to exercise all day long and experience no negative consequences from doing that. I fantasized about my full-time job just being working out on camera. I think that's a very common experience of that show for sure, of The Biggest Loser. Fat characters are the funny ones. That's where their value comes from. The Biggest Loser made me think that the only kind of exercise that works is when you do it for hours, you throw up from exertion. And Madeline saying, I've come to know how pervasive it is. I don't think I can watch any TV show or movie I watched as a kid or a teen that doesn't have at least one moment of weight stigma or discrimination. I definitely echo that experience. I've watched some older shows back with my partner recently and kind of cringed at the comments and said to myself, like, and to my partner, like, how could they say that? Like, how was that approved? I don't remember any positive fat representation from my childhood media. Absolutely. Even growing up watching Disney princess movies, you know, they were the only female characters that I was exposed to. Absolutely. I agree. Folks are saying, you know, you don't want to watch these shows or movies where there's anti-fat bias, but there are so many where it's just kind of a jump scare, like out of nowhere, all of a sudden, that's where we are. Thank you so much for sharing in the chat. There are so many responses here, and I'm just so appreciative of everything that you're sharing. I think you're all spot on, right? These experiences and these beliefs that we learn from watching this type of media is really what sinks in with us, and what, as I said, encodes these beliefs even more deeply into our cultural norms. It's like, if you're somebody who is maybe not in a larger body and you're watching this type of media, what do you then think about people who are in larger bodies, right? Especially if you don't have people who are in larger bodies in your life. It's hard to reconcile the two and not believe that those stereotypes are true. And so it just perpetuates the stigma. So moving on to magazines, these are some magazine covers that I pulled from Google. Just wanted to kind of highlight that these are used to reinforce body standards to an extreme, and really to promote absolutely unachievable standards that are not backed by science. So one of the most interesting things to me is this Vogue diet from the 70s that's in the bottom left corner, where folks are basically told to eat hard-boiled eggs and white wine and coffee all day long, with 5 ounces of steak for dinner. And that is, you know, touted as like, this is the best way to eat. This is really healthy. It's going to help you lose weight. And that's the messaging that we're inundated with. So, you know, this person lost this amount of weight, America's fattest cities, lose 20 pounds of lard, you know, how I got thin fast. And I think for me as a millennial, what stands out most is kind of the portrayal of Jessica Simpson when I was a teenager, whose body changed as she aged naturally and had children naturally, and then was posted in the tabloids, as we see here, as like, she can't stop gaining weight. And most poignantly, her $4 million weight loss deal is in jeopardy. And so that's something that we're going to talk a little bit about later. But the idea that folks who are in smaller bodies, especially celebrities, profit from that and are paid by the diet industry to represent themselves and say, hey, if you do this diet, if you do this program, you're going to look like me, you're going to live like me. And then when those people have these natural body changes that we all develop, all of a sudden, you know, these big money deals are in jeopardy because their bodies have changed, and that's not allowed in the diet industry unless changing means getting smaller. I'll pass it over to Hannah to talk about food and nutrition in the media.
Yeah, so everything that you're saying, Meredith, but specifically looking at food and nutrition in the media, I'm going to focus towards food documentaries and kind of piggyback off what Meredith has already said about celebrities and expand it even more. For food documentaries in the media, there are so many coming out frequently. I just went on some of my streaming services just to be like, what's out there? There were so many that I'm like, I feel like I can't even keep up. I will say not all food documentaries will take this approach. However, very frequently, there is a fear tactic approach here. So in week 2, when we discussed community and education systems, I had touched on Super Size Me, a food documentary that is frequently shown in schools that specifically is focused on fast food and demonizing it. As we move into adulthood, we continue to be influenced and consume media through these different food documentaries and celebrities that claim to be experts in nutrition. Kind of like Meredith was saying, if you just read my book, you just follow my recommendations or eat from my food product line, you will look like me. Many food documentaries will use graphic imagery and very blunt slogans for titles to create this like shock value, right? To highlight maybe a quote unquote public health crisis or public policies. So, for example, on the slide, we have fat, sick, and nearly dead and poisoned. So, this extreme language contributes again to that stigmatization, that pathologization of folks that live in larger and fat bodies. When we know factually that because someone lives in a larger body does not mean they have health conditions, it doesn't mean that they are near death. These messages are just so extremely harmful and continue to contribute to those negative assumptions and beliefs for folks that live in larger bodies. It's really contributing to that marginalization that fat folks are experiencing. Also specifically in Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, y'all, I put myself through it again. I watched it again for you all just to like really, what does it look like? It came out in 2010. I'm like, what do I feel 10 years later plus watching it? I mean, it's showing someone going to significant lengths for weight loss through juicing like only fruits and vegetables and eliminating significantly important nutrients like protein and fat and non-fruit carbohydrate containing foods like whole grain, starchy vegetables, and some dairy products. So throughout that, they interview different folks in America and really create a space of shame and what they report they eat or like to eat, especially if it's somebody they're interviewing. Their approach to somebody, how they were interviewing folks that were in a fat body versus folks that were in a thin body was very interesting. Like even using words near death. So just like these documentaries are so extremely harmful. When we look at celebrity influence in the media, from all the things that we've already seen today, and Meredith will keep taking us through, one of the people that really stands out for me specifically over the years is Oprah. So we have watched Oprah go through body changes both up and down throughout 20 plus years. She's brought different folks on her shows. For example, one that stands out really specifically for me is Dr. Oz, that make these health claims that are at times extreme, not realistic for the average consumer, and some at times not even like factual. Through Oprah's body changes, she's promoted several products and programs, things like Jenny Craig, Weight Watchers, Noom, Oh, That's Good, the food line. She continues to contribute to diet culture and the diet industry while also making a profit off of it, right? I think that when I think of Oprah, the saddest and most harmful part of watching Oprah's journey is that she is a model of what weight cycling looks like, which we know from research is more harmful to the body than actually living in a larger body. It's again that messaging of weight loss at any cost that we see. The last person I'm going to take us through is Gwyneth Paltrow very briefly. She's an actress that frequently is promoting different products. In most recent years, she published a book called Intuitive Fasting. So kind of the other take, a spinoff of what intuitive eating is, intuitive fasting. I won't go down that road, but I'm sure you can imagine if you've been here with me for 6 weeks, what my thoughts are on it. Other examples are when Gwyneth does an interview and she walks us through a day of what a quote unquote wellness routine is for her that is extremely restrictive and includes receiving IV fluids with vitamins. Most people do not have the time or money to have a doctor or a nurse make a house call for a bag of IV fluids every day, right? Most don't have a dietitian to create a meal plan, have a chef to make different types of meals, have a personal trainer to guide them through different forms of movement. The higher socioeconomic privileges and resources of celebrities and what they have are just glaringly different than what most humans even have access to. I'm going to pass it back to you, Meredith.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So as Hannah has talked about, ultimately, especially with food and nutrition in the media, but also just with bodies and body size and ultimately all of that encompassed, we have this theme of lifestyle glorification. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the changes that we've seen with the advent of reality TV from the early 2000s to now. Overall, cosmetic surgery, so plastic surgery, has increased 48% from 2000 to 2006. So in 6 short years, it increased 48% with the amount of procedures that were being done. And I like to think of 2000 to 2006 as kind of like the beginning of reality TV. And of course, it's only gone up from there. I couldn't find a newer statistic for this, unfortunately. But I think we all are probably well aware that reality TV has only gotten more and more popular and that cosmetic surgery likely has as well. And that these two things are linked. What we know is that viewership of these reality cosmetic surgery shows like Botch, Dr. Miami, all those things, those are significantly related to overall body dissatisfaction, media internalization, and disordered eating. So again, the more of that content that we consume, the more that becomes the cultural norm at large in our society, and also for us personally. When we're talking about young girls consuming this content, a study of 37 girls ages 13 to 17 showed that media and peer influence drive these fad diet attempts. And really what kind of hits it home is that this portrayal of thinness linked to happiness is what has a significant impact on teenagers, because as we're consuming this content, we're seeing like folks like the Kardashians or the Real Housewives, that these people are wealthy, these people are in small bodies, these people are doing whatever it takes to, make their bodies perfect, surgery, fad diets, anything. And they're so happy because of all of these things. And I say that with heavy sarcasm because we know that that's not true. But that is where this significant impact lands, is this idea of thinness equals happiness, beauty equals happiness. That is really pushed and so pervasive. I want to take us back to 2 weeks ago, Hannah's discussion of the GLP-1 agonist medications like Ozempic and Wegovy. These are so in the spotlight. As Hannah mentioned, this is like the most talked about class of medications since Viagra. Like, when is the last time that you have seen a magazine headline for a pharmaceutical drug rather than Viagra, right? Like Ozempic and Wegovy are so buzzy right now. And so ultimately the internet is full of speculation, before and after images, like who's on it, who, do we think that this person's weight loss is due to this? Like, it's really just fueling this conversation around bodies and how to achieve the perfect body. And really this idea that we're normalizing the ideal body has to be attained at any cost, physical, mental, or financial. And the buzz around these pharmaceutical drugs can be really dangerous. When we talked about informed consent, I just want to highlight that again, if you weren't present for that conversation, we're certainly not telling anyone what to do with their body. I think your medical decisions are between you and your healthcare provider. And informed consent is really important. You need to know what the risks and benefit of things are, and not just, I want to take this medication because the Kardashians talked about how helpful it was for them, or, whatever that conversation looks like. But we're seeing a lot more of that in media. Briefly, the science of marketing. What we need to know here is, how do we sell you something? We create a problem. We create a solution. We tell you that we have the best solution, or the fastest solution, or the only solution to this problem. And we keep you coming back for more. Marketing is a really powerful tool with the goal to sell you the next quick fix or the ultimate key to happiness, right? So everyone trying to sell us something is positioning themselves as, I know better than you do what is good for you. I have the answers. It's this one up, one down power dynamic. The problem with that is marketing does what it's intended to do. It keeps us in this cycle of needing or wanting the next best thing. And so with diet culture specifically, this means that we write off our own bodies, our own internal voices, to prioritize these external claims that science tells us are actually decidedly false. So here is your weekly reminder that the diet industry is worth $72 billion for a reason, and that marketing is doing its job. And so we have to be aware consumers. Part of that is media literacy. We talked about media literacy back in week 3, I believe. And so, we've delved into the ways that media influence standards of beauty and our perception of value, but now we need to understand what we can do about it. Media literacy is about more than just consuming media. It's about asking questions, being curious, and staying skeptical about the messages that we encounter across television, movies, advertisements. The National Association for Media Literacy Education recommends that we develop our media literacy by understanding the purpose and the underlying values and perspectives of the media we're viewing. Acknowledging media is subject to individual interpretation. It lands differently for different people, and highlighting that media holds a lot of power in shaping our beliefs, our attitudes, and our behaviors, especially around perceptions of body image and weight. So when we're looking at how to mitigate weight stigma through media literacy, we want to reject the thin ideal and the diet mentality. We want to empower ourselves with critical thinking, and we want to advocate against harmful messages that we see and receive. These are a couple of key questions and thoughts for your media analysis. Who created this content? Why was it produced? What's the point? What is the emotional impact? What am I intended to feel, and what am I feeling? That it can be interpreted differently or perceived differently, trying to promote empathy and understanding that things don't land the same for everyone, and that we are almost always missing information. So being aware of what's excluded from the content helps us in forming a more complete understanding of what we're viewing. And I will pop these in the chat with some explanations if that is helpful. And with that, we have the fabulous Jen Ponton with us today. I'm going to read through her bio and hand it on over to her. Most known as the fiercely feminist fat activist Ruby on AMC's critical darling Dietland, Jen is an award-winning actress and body liberation activist with a television resume that includes 30 Rock, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, Orange is the New Black, Law and Order SVU, The Blacklist, and Blue Buds. She also starred in late Ash Christian's body-positive romantic comedy Love on the Run. In 2020, she delivered the TEDx talk Hollywood's Fat Phobia Problem. She also hosts All the Fucks, a storytelling podcast about caring too much. Thanks for being with us, Jen.
Thank you so much, Meredith and Hannah. That was incredible. Oh, why are my windows resizing? Okay, here we go. That was really fabulous. I so appreciated that deep dive, especially on reality TV and on documentaries, which is like a whole moment of the culture right now. Everyone's watching documentaries all the time, and we already are now a species who like reads a tweet and then all of a sudden we know everything. So if we spend 90 minutes watching a movie that's like burgers bad, man, that's just like an awful world to be living in. So to give you all a little bit of a background on me, I have been I've wanted to be an actor my whole life. I'm going to use the word fat. I'm a fat liberationist. So, with the same, waiver that Hannah and Meredith presented it with. I've always been a fat kid. I was fat by the time I was 6 or 7. And so of course, all of the messaging that I got from literally everyone, my parents, the children around me that were certainly not my friends, but antagonists, teachers, was very reiterative of, you could never be on TV. You could never be in a movie. You could never be on stage. No one wants to watch a body like yours. Try to do the things that you think you can do. And I found my first real liberation in that, to loose myself from those expectations, when I took on speech and debate in high school. Because if you were the theater kid doing speech events, you got to like do one-person plays and you got to be all the characters, and I got to be performing and have rooms of people laughing at me, not because I was fat and didn't belong there, but because I was like talented and funny and good with my timing and good with landing jokes. And so I built up a confidence and skill set that was not at all predicated on the roles that were out there in the real world, right? Because I got to play all of the characters in my speech and debate pieces. And then as I went on to college, I went through the very typical experience of a person with a baby face being cast as like old grandma number 4. Because if you are a fat femme, you absolutely cannot play the star, the ingenue, the person with a love story. And these are obviously insidious messages, and actors are not immune to them, right? That seeps right in through all the seams of our sense of self and what we deserve in our real lives too. Absolutely created just a disaster area in terms of what I felt like I deserved romantically, and in having, you know, an exciting and vivacious and pleasing life. um I did I started with my eating disorder when I was like 11, and that went through enormous roller coastering, especially as I got into college, and that message was really hammered home to me that I could not be successful unless I acquiesced and uh and magically found myself in a thin body. Um, so I had a really antagonistic relationship with my body, especially through college, where I probably did the most damage. But at the end of the day, I was never a person whose body changed dramatically. I was always going to be the fat character. And once I graduated, even though I was always playing these very like frumpy, sad characters who, you know, would like cry and open the fridge as if we couldn't get more creative with anything, right? Um, once I graduated and went into I'm East Coast, so I always envisioned that I would like be on Broadway and just be a starving theater artist. Um, I honestly, here's the good thing, although it's sort of phasing into the past. Uh, the good thing was I could not find any theater roles for me at all. And after a few years of putting myself out there from plays and musicals, it was very frustrating. I could only do children's theater because fat fat girls who look like chipmunks are more than welcome in children's theater. Um, but I could not book any other shows for the life of me. And then I started auditioning for film and TV. And what I did find, miraculously, as awful as film and TV have been for, you know, a fat propaganda, what I found was they were looking for real bodies. And my apologies up front for using that term. It's cruel and it's a misnomer, but I'll just use it for the binary of it right now, because the problem with media is that it's so freaking binary. And I think in order for us to dismantle it, we have to understand that that's what they lean into. Like wild swings. If you are not white, you are black, which is also why we don't see necessarily more indigenous or Latinx representation in film and TV. Especially in terms of gender, in terms of being fat or thin. And um and they were looking for more real people. It didn't mean they were going to affirm that I was, you know, a miraculous creature and deserving of all the gifts that the world had to give. But it did mean that I could read a one line role, and it had nothing to do with my body. And there would be, you know, 10 other people in the waiting room, 10 other actors who all looked different. And that was incredibly freeing and liberating for me, because by that point, this is like 2008. By that point, I had already gone through my own radicalization and had gotten on the Health at Every Size train, and had gotten into intuitive eating and was starting to really heal my relationship with my body and with my eating disorder. And I wanted my career to be an affirmation of that. So thankfully, that kind of shored up my mental health as I went into the world of film and TV, and there were these lovely light moments of like, oh, I could just read for this waiter or this cashier or this neighbor, and it has nothing to do with my body, and they're not going to make fat jokes, and it's not going to be this reflection of what I deserve as an undervalued person in the culture. Um, but by the same token, I started to get called in for roles for fat girls that were absolutely atrocious. And the good thing was that I had shored up my mental health enough to be able to see it as bullshit and call it out as bullshit. And back in the days of yore, before all social media, there was a blog ring. I don't know if anyone here remembers blog rings. There was a blog ring called the Fatosphere, and many like luminaries and intellectuals who maintain their stance on fat politics, um, were writing about different areas, and I joined it and started to write about what it was like to be a fat actor and the kinds of casting breakdowns that I was seeing and the kinds of jobs that I was straight up rejecting because there was no way that I wanted to put myself in the way of an oncoming train because I knew that my mental health was on the line. So I've always been very picky about not taking on roles um that would insult me. Um and but that doesn't mean that I didn't receive a lot of casting notices and a lot of audition opportunities that I then, politely turned down. And everyone that I would go on to work with, my agents and managers, we were always on the same page. And I was like, listen, I'm a fat actor. I'm happy to tell stories about fat people, but there is absolutely a line. And if this is like a real slice of life about what it's like to inhabit a fat body, and it's not some thin person's like sadness porn of what they imagine we go through, or sometimes even worse, people who once upon a time were fat and they see that part of their life as like the absolute dregs, and like now they have found the light, sometimes writing about fatness like that. But with the support of my representatives, they were always fully on board, and no one ever tried to walk me backwards into taking work that I didn't want to take. Um, and through that, there were definitely some stepping stones. Like I starred in a movie that to me was the first fat positive um heroin since like Hairspray. And that it had been a really long time. And what I found so incredible about her was that at no point did she insult herself. She didn't take any of it in. So it portrayed the world as being very fat phobic and very insulting and aggressive towards her, but she didn't take it on, and she didn't let that alter her behavior or alter what she dreamed of for herself. And to me, that was so radical in 2011. And now, like, thankfully, we've moved past those days, and we see people like Adie Bryant starring in Shrill, Divine Joy Rudolph like winning every incredible award right now. I mean, Gabby Sidibe. Like, we have so many incredible fat performers in the limelight right now. And of course, to be very binary about it, because it's a very binary field, um, it is mostly a struggle for women, for femmes, to get our bodies and our stories out in media and to have them taken seriously and to have them not reduced to jokes, because we let fat men and fat masks star in things all the time and just luck right into all of the wonderful things that happen to them, and all the benefits that they incur as they just like stumble through their life. um I will say that we are starting to turn a corner, and I don't like it. I hate it. We're coming industry wide, we're coming out of two gigantic strikes that have absolutely hobbled, I mean, it's bad. It's very, very dire right now. And the sad part about that is that the very greedy people who own the media corporations are not interested in taking risk. And much like we've seen with any other marginalized identity, people of color, indigenous people, queer people, trans people, people with disabilities, like that is what the industry perceives as risk, as our fat bodies, especially in the direction that our current culture is taking us through, which is, hey, do not reduce us to fat jokes, essentially. All of that is perceived as risk by the mucky mucks. And when they see too much risk, and when things are a full-on barn fire, the way that they are right now, which is so unfortunate, it means we pull back from risk. And that, I think, is this convergence of what we see happening with the GLP-1, is that what we're overall calling these injectable awful things? Which is tied to the prevalence of Ozempic and Wegovy, which is tied to how impossible it is to see someone on social media, to see an influencer who doesn't have the same face as everybody else, because of how popular injectables have become and how we filter now. Everything is perfect, and unfortunately, what we see as perfect does not include fatness, and because it is a risk for media moguls to take, I think we're going to see a lot of representation backslide now, not just for fat people, for queer folks, for trans folks, for actors of color. I think we're about to go into some dark ages, which is not news that I want, and certainly not news that I want to give anyone. But I think it's important to talk about, because we've had this really robust period of time, this, handful of like really juicy years where we've actually allowed fat bodies to star in things, and where I don't just have to pull Cameron Manheim out of a hat from like her Emmy win in 1997, which was once upon a time you'd say like, well, who's fat and on TV? And you'd be like, oh, Cameron Manheim and Monique. That was rough. We lived through that, and it's not like that anymore. Like I could miss out on 70% of the incredible fat performers out there, many women of color, indigenous women. I mean, it's wild, but I think we're about to see a real contraction happening. It is not divorced from what we see on social media. It's not divorced from what's going on with influencers and with the GLP-1 craze, and the prevalence of Instagram face. It's all part of the same dragon. And I think I just want to like shore you all up, because it doesn't mean that we're not going to get back on the right track culturally, but I think we're going to see a contraction for the next several years. And like I tell you all as much as I tell myself, don't lose heart. I think as a culture, like with the AI stuff that's on the table, we're going to get really tired, I think, as human beings, of seeing fake things. I think we're going to tire of seeing only Marvel movies. I think we're going to tire of these photos that are obviously AI. You're going to see a lot of media come out that's going to be AI. It's going to be cheap. It's going to be fun for a little while. It's going to lose its thrill. The same way that you might scroll through influencers and think they're really pretty for a while, and then you're like, oh my God, why do you all look the same? Why does no one have real teeth anymore? Where did everyone's real teeth go? This is my own personal white whale. Like, where is everyone's real teeth? You used to see real teeth in movies all the time, and I'll look at someone's old smile and I'm like, that was fine. That was a perfectly fine smile. Why do we all have veneers now? Anyway, we're moving into rant mode, which means I think I'm done with my point.
Jen,
keep going?
no, I got you. I am just Sorry, right as you were wrapping up, I had like 5 questions come through, so my brain was just like, oh, gotta look through everything. Thank you so much. There's some love for you in the chat. I think that this topic is one, or this session is one that I've been also really looking forward to, because I also am a millennial who grew up in all of these ages, and I think that just like the impact of watching older like comedy movies and things like that, like I hear so often people being like, you couldn't make that movie today, and like it's a good thing you can't make these movies today, because they do have no place in this world, like really they do not. And so I just love you speaking to your personal experience, and just I really appreciate you being here today. There were 2 questions that came through that are just kind of some clarifying questions that might be more for Meredith and Hannah. And then I also have a question specifically for you, Jen. So can you give us a brief overview of what Ozempic and GLP-1 meds do? There was some confusion just regarding like what their original purpose was.
Yeah, totally. I can help with that. So GLP-1 agonist medications, GLP stands for glucagon-like peptide. They were originally developed to help treat diabetes. They help manage insulin regulation. They help the body process sugar and insulin and just kind of keep your levels stable. That's the point of them. That's why they were developed. As they were deployed into use by people with diabetes, a side effect of these medications was noticed that people lost drastic amount of weight. And that is because of the way that these act in the body. So they act in a couple of ways. And Hannah can probably speak to it in better sciencey terms, but basically they slow your gastric processing and emptying. So food just takes a little bit longer to move through your system. And they also basically mimic your fullness hormone in your brain. So there's some appetite suppression as well. So because of those mechanisms, they saw folks with diabetes using these medications for diabetes, losing lots of weight. And unfortunately, that spun out of control, and kind of, as Hannah and I feel like Hannah and I have coined this phrase, weight loss at any cost. Like we're just a broken record about that because it is so prevalent. But that really is kind of what has happened with the pharmaceutical industry with these medications. Is that something that started specifically for diabetes? Weight loss was noticed in the folks using it, and it was kind of spun out into, okay, let's now market this for weight loss, but also prescribe it at much higher dosages for weight loss, which is where we start to see things like gastroparesis and overdose and all of these like really horrible side effects that people are having because of the super high dosages that are being marketed for weight loss rather than for diabetes. Hopefully that helps answer your question about just what they are and how they work.
Yes, thank you so much. And for those who weren't here last week, we did also go over a lot of medical things. So as we, the series is recorded, so you are more than welcome to see last week. And then I think that this relates to some of the TV shows that have come about, such as like My 600-Pound Life. So I will be using the O word and the MO word just as part of the question. People say obese and morbidly obese are medical words, and that is true for people who are and that it is true for people who are at 600 pounds or over, or around there. What is our argument for not using those words, and how do we argue against it?
That's a really good question. I think for me, it comes down to not wanting to reduce someone to their medical status. When I see someone who is experiencing cancer and going through everything that goes along with that, I'm not like, oh my gosh, that cancer patient. Like, I'm not looking at them as the identity of their disease. That is not the sum of who they are. And also, I don't know their medical history. I don't know anything about them. And so I think it is very aggressive of us to look at someone's body size and assume their medical status, right? Unless you're their doctor, you don't know anything about their health markers. And so I know that there are a lot of folks out there who really deeply believe that body size equates to health, and that in itself is often an argument that you have to have. And sometimes I will be as reductionistic as saying there are no diseases or disorders or medical problems that only fat people get. Like disease and disorder and medical problems happen across the size spectrum, across everything. And so I think just trying to talk a little bit about that, and also to know when to cut your losses in that argument if it is not feeling respectful for you. Hannah and Jen, I'm sure you have thoughts too.
I mean, Mayor, all the things that you said, I couldn't agree more. I'm sure you saw me like nodding very big because I'm a very expressive human. I think too, when we are thinking of this, when we're looking at somebody's body shape, body size, we don't know anything about their health status. We have to also make sure we're disentangling morality, and that this person, how they are choosing to take care of themselves, the medical decisions they're making with their medical providers is up to them. And just making sure that we're also not I feel like very frequently, especially when we look at these body shapes and sizes that are on the higher spectrum, we are looking at these people and we're not just thinking, oh, this weight, we're also like attaching like good versus bad, healthy versus unhealthy, like making sure that we're practicing to disentangle that morality piece to folks like this, and that they are not good or bad for the body shape or size that they exist in, no, across the spectrum. So I just wanted to call that out too, but everything you were saying, Meredith, as well.
I have one last addition that is way less sciencey, but and I'm gonna reach for it. But my first complaint would be that I only heard the O word really bandied about in like 2003, and it was the moment at which they changed, and it was all right. This is just capitalism, right? They changed their BMI chart to make a much larger group fall into OW and O and MO. And it was strictly to make more money. Like that was the only reason. I really like, you have to do some deep Googling on it. Because I can't like show my receipts right now. But that was the moment at which we all of a sudden had an O epidemic, and it was like everyone was, just like fainting in the news about it. And the fact that BMI itself is bull, and is based on race science, which is not real and is just racist, that white people came up with in the 1800s, I believe. And it was all just to show how white people were superior to anyone else, specifically white men. So it's like using phrenology to talk about mental health. And so anything that we talk about that tries to legitimize O and MO and even OW is based on super, super faulty, racist, not even science from hundreds of years ago that then got scaled up in order for people to make more money. So it's just like all dubious. And then the reasons on top of that, absolutely not reducing someone to a diagnosis and not having that be what identifies their humanity. 1000%.
Thank you, all three of you, for those wonderful responses. This was is specifically for Jen, but Hannah and Meredith, if you have any theater experience, you are more than welcome to hop in as well.
Oh,
so this person said, "Hi Jen, did you find in your acting experiences that fellow cast members would tend to be bullying and petty towards you? I had my first real theater experience last year. I was in Seattle Reps The Tempest this past summer, and the collective bullying I experienced from other cast members was appalling, particularly in the intersectionality of me being autistic, having complex PTSD, and no pre-trauma identity, and being fat. I wonder what's a good way to stay strong during that when someone like me still wants to be in the production."
I am so sorry you had that experience. That is really terrible. And like the fact that it's not some community theater where people like are just there to spend their free time and be catty and kind of backstabby, and then it's a rep experience which is professional, is really, really upsetting. I'm so sorry that you went through that. Personally, my experiences were that I was very it kind of changed. When I was younger, and I was in college. I mean, I was very discounted, but it was like in a, oh, you'll never star in it. You could play the Nana. Like I had the feeling that these people liked me, but they devalued me. And so people were not unkind. I wasn't bullied, but what ended up happening, kind of felt like the lackey. I felt like the sweet little kid sister who, oh, it's so sweet that you want to be an actor. Oh, how cute that is. Um, without them overtly being cruel. It did change. It became cruel because when we graduated and all of these people, men, most of whom were in straight size bodies, went on to like pursue the dream, I started having success. And they did not like that because they did not think that because I wasn't threatening to them. So the fact that I was persona non grata was just like took me totally off the chessboard, and just they didn't feel like they had to compete with me. But all of a sudden, the fat girl has the audacity to keep going. The fat girl has the audacity to think she's good enough and like to rapidly be outpacing me in her career. The way that my college friends just flew away was heartbreaking and awful when I realized that the only reason they liked me was contingent upon not feeling threatened by me, not feeling like I could steal their shine. And I have not thankfully experienced it in adulthood. Everyone's been warm to me. And you know, like if they underestimate me, I don't take that as cruel. I do take it as foolish. But I haven't experienced that level of overt cruelty, and I'm really, really, really sorry that you did.
I think that this also can relate back to what we've talked about in weeks past, just related to how to know when to be around people and to like step up and like advocate for yourself, and times of when to just be like, you are not even worth my time. You are not even worth any part of my energy, because you have obviously a ton of issues. And again, I also am so sorry for anyone who experiences those types of appalling behavior, because it's absolutely ridiculous. And I think that, Jen, you sharing the fact that you think that things are getting better and that you have hope and that you've seen things get better, I think can be a little piece of hope that we can all hold on to moving forward. Because I think that this has been impacting all of us since we were children, you know, some even longer. And I think that that's just something that is really great to hear, that you are seeing this move forward. And uh, the person in the chat who asked the question just said, thank you so much. It was my question, and it's still a very large wound, but it means a lot to hear that someone cares. And I think that that can be a really big message that we provide to all of you, that all of us here care. We are doing this to make things better for people, to provide this as an unlearning for everyone, so that, you know, maybe in the future, if someone is being appalling to you, you can be like, hey, here's an unlearning series for you to attend. Here are some great resources for you to look into. Here's a phenomenal actress, Jen, who is phenomenal at what she does and who is a trailblazer in the industry. Like, here is some wonderful people for you to rely on. And I do recognize that we are at time, a little over time. So I appreciate y'all staying around and for this last little bit. Jen, I don't know if you have any final words that you would like to share, anything at all. I saw it looked like you wanted to speak, so I just want to provide you an opportunity.
You know, I think what I would say for that person who shared, I would also say, like, it's awful, especially if this was a paid job. It's awful when we're put into the position where we need to take something, we need the money, because otherwise the lights aren't going to be on. We're not going to, you know, be able to support ourselves. That's one issue that sucks on every level for all individuals in all fields. But I would also say to you, please don't be afraid outside of that. Please don't be afraid to say no, to leave a project where a group, especially where the management, whoever's managing it, your director, your stage manager, where they are not helping to facilitate a safe and respectful place for you. It is not acceptable. And you can always remove yourself from that. And it sucks when you want to tell a story. And it sucks when you want to be on stage. And it certainly sucks if that was a paycheck that you were relying upon. But as a human, you have every right to do it. And I was looking for a podcast. There's this podcast that a guy did about Goodspeed Opera House and his really horrible bullying experience. He's not a fat person. I think he might be neurodivergent, and he definitely has some mental health complications. And it's this immense calling out of all of the cast members and all the people in the management who failed him. Do some Googling if you think it might just help you feel seen. It has a lot of talk back. It has a lot of reflection. It might be a great place for you to just feel very represented and seen. But yeah, my advice would be you can always say no. You can always remove yourself from a harmful environment.
Thank you so much, Jen, for that final message. Thank you, as always, to Meredith and Hannah for providing a phenomenal clinical and dietary presentation. Thank you to everyone who is participating. And just again, Jen, just a huge, huge thanks to you. Thank you so much for being here today. And we thank everyone for staying over a little bit. I am so looking forward to next week. I'm sad that it is our last week, but we'll be covering social media. And we look forward to seeing all of you then. Thank you all so much. And we will see you next week.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
y'all. Thank
Take
you.
care.